Humans love conspiracy theories. That is a fact. But we are consumers of all sorts of information, particularly in this era of internet. It is as though we've some kind of innate desire for there to be something more nefarious at play than, say, what logic would call chance or circumstance. Across popular culture, conspiracy theories abound, discussing everything from the moon landing, the pangolin being a carrier of coronavirus, Area 51, the death of John F. Kennedy, to what happened in Roswell. In music, they claim Tupac is still alive and hiding out as a farmer in Cuba. Then we find ourselves in 2023. Conspiracy theories have never been more relevant. The internet dominates every discourse. One of the most talked about stars is, of course, a man called Bob Dylan. Given that as a musician, his lyrics are in fact a dense mesh of ideas, it comes to little surprise that the man behind them has always had a penchant for cultivating mysterious, almost otherworldly public image. Now, years ago, Bob gave a somewhat surreal interview on 60 Minutes. When asked why he was continuing to go out and perform after a decade-long career, Dylan said that he had made a deal with something a long time ago, and that it all went back to the destiny thing. I made a bargain with it long time ago. I'm holding up my end of the bargain, he said. Now, when he was prompted to reveal who or what he bargained with, Dylan said he'd made the bargain with the chief commander of this world and the world we cannot see. So instead of taking Dylan's comment as a bit of fun, or allowing the inference that he made a deal with God, the internet believes that Dylan actually made a deal with the devil himself, so he could get famous. It's not surprising that a relationship between Dylan and the devil had been conjured up in the wake of his rather bizarre comments. It's almost certain that Dylan was simply yanking the interviewer and the audience tail, but the damage was already done. The World Wide Web had heard what Dylan had said. In a turn of events, we see the protagonist, John Taylor, for those who are new here, meet an old friend of his from Kunduz camp in Afghanistan called Dawson Myers. Dawson Myers is a man with whom he had probably escaped camp and was later captured and tossed back into the STM gallows back in Kunduz Mountains. Who knows what happened? John's encounter with the STM men today comes as a huge surprise, in fact, but not as bizarre as meeting his old friend Dawson Myers, who seems, I beg your pardon, to have made a deal with the devil himself. Or was it a case of being coerced by the devil's agents? Well, this we shall never know until we move on into the narrative very carefully and try to ascertain if Dawson Myers had chosen the devil or the very same entity the internet claims Dylan had made a pact with. So allow me to proceed from where I left in the previous episode. I know you needn't, he said. You've got an IQ of 170. That's super genius, isn't it, Mr. Taylor? Magnificent background check. That silenced me. I stared at him as though I would start at him and box him out the windshield. Like I said, Mr. Taylor, you've got to learn to get along. You're damn right I will, I retorted. Mission G, Prof. Stop. Mission G, Prof. What the hell is that? You don't give us orders, Mr. Taylor, he said Jake. We stop whenever we want. Mind spilling the beans? Mission G, Prof. I wrote on the white piece of paper. You remember that I was handed over a white piece of paper in the beginning of this flight. They would make my life a living hell if I pulled plaques. You ask way too many questions, Mr. Taylor. You know, Daniels, I have a history with the STM, I said. There are some lines I don't want to cross. Well, sir, he said, Mission G, Prof. Placard has been flagging with enough subventions for 5 years now. Do Sergeant Howard Green and Stephen Blame sound familiar to you? Not at all, I lied. Drop it, John, came a vehement interjection. Drop it. You can run, but you cannot hide. Careful, sir. People disappear and no one asks questions. I was convinced I had been watched much more closely than I had suspected. Destiny had flown me out of the United States, a hostage of men who had nothing to do with medicine. Mr. Bench, stay out of this, Daniels barked. Tame your boys and keep your mouth shut. I've got this handled, alright? And I have a master to wait on. Briefly, the two men conferred together. Mr. Bench was a clergy-faced elephant of a creature who had been recruited into several black ops in Iraq in 2001, but later dismissed after the Truth Movement gave the American citizens an oversight to a covert OP operation in which he was hit by a friendly fire. The friendly fire came from a guy called Herbert Shround, the man who had hijacked my flight back in 2001. What a coincidence. The story went that a young Romanian blood working for the CIA and exciting hollow discourses of envy between the two men. They both wanted to have her. After a decade of expense and luxury in company with the subject of this hatred, both men had grown poorer. Embarrassment had crept in. This state of affairs eventually created two scornful creatures, destitute of the ties that bound them together as STM soldiers. Fair enough, Mr. Jake Daniels, replied Mr. Bench. You haven't changed much, I see. The older the clock, they say, the louder the crow. Jake Daniels appeared agitated, crimson with fury. Deviation from protocol, Mr. Bench, is not our standards. We have our orders. It's the shadowy nature of the operations I've been through that has put me in the holy grail of not giving a rat's ass, Mr. Daniels. I cannot ignore the nervousness into which this conversation launched me, or the dissatisfaction I invoked from the emotional decay. It being 8 to 9 o'clock, we overflew the eastern section of Canada and cruised over the Atlantic Ocean. A disgusting gust originating from the southern Europe brought with it instances of breathtaking buffeting of the rotor blades. Images of Julia crept, I grieve to say, into my mind like motion pictures of an old-fashioned movie. I knew not at what times I had been watched. Jake went on, John, I have received instructions that you take over the X-Files hunt. Instructions? I asked, impatiently and remaining stock still, I beg your pardon. Yes, from Mr. Stephen Blame, the headquarters. Stephen? I said. Once and for all, let's get the name right. And by the way, is this what I think it is, a false OP? It's a classic tool of deception, Mr. Taylor, he said. We wouldn't want anybody asking questions. Oh, and for your information, Mr. Stephen threatened to kill my family when I tried to talk him out of it. You won't escape. You know too much. We need your heart in this. You know Mr. Howard is not one to keep his end of the bargain, Jake, I said. A friendly fire eats a friendly fire. And with that, I come to the end of my today's vlog. Please hit the subscribe button below to support the channel. Goodbye up until the next one.